Welcome. I'm Becca Manilow, Director of Community Relations for Buckingham Companies and our philanthropic arm, Buckingham Foundation. Welcome to the Alexander. Our hotel is artistic, lively, unique, and connects well with the millennial generation. Tonight, we're here to celebrate a book launch, Cause for Change. We are thrilled to partner with local Indianapolis company, Achieve, as well as the Case Foundation. Our guest moderator this evening is Emily Yu. Emily is a millennial, as well as the Director of Marketing for the Case Foundation. The Senior Director of Marketing and Partnerships for the Case Foundation. Emily creates and facilitates opportunities for social change through foundation initiatives, including the development and implementation of key programs, volunteerism, campaigns, and programs. In a true millennial fashion, Emily is an active social media user as well as an award-winning blogger. Please welcome Emily Yu.
Thank you, and thank you so much for that really warm introduction, and again to the Alexander for hosting us at this beautiful facility. And as Becca mentioned, we are here today to celebrate a very special book launch. I have a copy right here, Cause for Change. You want to grab a picture? There you go. Okay. This is happening live, real time, people. So I had the distinct honor of coming here and participating in this discussion with Carrie and Derek, and I'm so honored. Carrie is principal of KDS Strategies, but before that, she was actually a driving force within the Case Foundation in our own millennial work and exploration. She's also spent her career working in both government and nonprofit sectors to provide real solutions with a focus on innovative program design, strategic communication, and social media strategy, all with a unique understanding of the next generation. We also have Derek Feldman here as well, who's CEO of Achieve, and it's a creative fundraising agency focused on engaging millennials and attracting supporters to causes. We've worked together actually for the last 3 years on MCon, and he never ceases to amaze me with his talent and true leadership, so I'm excited to be here with you tonight. He's also spearheading the efforts for the research team on the Millennial Impact Project, which we'll talk a little bit about tonight. And that's to understand how millennials connect, involve, and give to organizations. He's a writer and speaker as well on the latest trends in fundraising, donor engagement, and millennials. So welcome tonight, both
Thanks.
of you.
We're glad to be here. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Emily.
Yeah. So the format for tonight, we're going to do a lively discussion. We're going to talk all about the book and ask some probing questions about millennial engagement and offer you here in the audience, as well as those watching at home or their office, some tips and strategies and tools on millennial engagement across sectors. We're also going to save about the last 10 minutes of tonight for Q&A with those people at home who might be watching via the live stream or just following along on Twitter. So please feel free to send questions throughout the night using the hashtag #CauseForChange. Or if you're watching via the live stream, simply submit your questions using that little box for the chat function on the side of your screen. So without further ado, let's get started. Carrie and Derek, can you tell us a little bit about Cause for Change? Why was writing this book so important to you?
Sure. I guess I'll start things off here, Emily. And first, I just want to thank everybody who's gathered this evening at the Alexander, and of course, a special thanks to everybody who's tuning in from across the country to the live cast. So we really appreciate that. We feel like you're here with us, and hope that you'll tweet us good questions. Derek and I approach this. If you look at the first decade of the 21st century, there's significant change, socially, economically, politically, technologically. And if you look at all of this change is nothing new, but the accelerated pace of change is having a profound impact on our society. And if you couple this with the fact that the millennial generation who's coming of age at a time when all of this change is taking place, you have organizations and institutions who in many respects are kind of stuck in the old way of doing things, and this generation who's coming into this and saying, hey, we operate a little bit differently. There are world events and societal things that have happened that have changed the way that we work and operate and do business, and that's having an impact on organizations and institutions. And so we wanted to, Derek and I have both spent the better part of our careers, so the last decade plus, in the social impact sector in a variety of different capacities, as you noted during introduction. But it's, for us, we're both millennials. We think it's important, and we note this in the beginning of the book, that we actually fall on the upper end of the millennial generation. We're cuspers, but for all practical purposes here, we're millennials. We think it's important to note that because the stories, the anecdotes, what we pull from in the book is really drawn a great deal from our own personal experiences. And what we hope the book does is help organizations and institutions better understand how our generation is operating a little bit differently, and be able to help them through the process of understanding and being able to engage.
So I think it's I have obviously similar interest and answer there. A lot of I think the reason that I created the book and we started talking with Carrie about this is that from my world, when we work with a lot of different organizations that are focused on fundraising and communications, and they always are trying to figure out what to do and where you go from this. And the funny thing is that there is no clear-cut answer of it, and I really wish there was, because we probably wouldn't be sitting here. We would have done it at this time. And so I've spent a lot of my time previous to my work at Achieve focusing on K-12 and how do we help those understand service in the classroom and really raising support for that. And as I started to look at other organizations in my role at Achieve, what I realized is that all these organizations are still trying to figure it out. And if we could create a mechanism or at least a book that talks a little bit about it to get people going, I think we're going to be much better.
Great, thank you both. And that's actually a good segue in terms of some strategies and solutions you guys can offer, having done all this research for the book. So Derek, maybe you can take the first one. One of the strategies you recommend has been to do with moving millennials up this so-called ladder of engagement, or some sort of spiral-like cycle, as you refer to in the book, starting out with consumer-like mindsets to creators of ideas and actual experiences and solutions. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this cycle works and how people can apply it?
Sure. So what we see with millennials is that they'll start to get involved in causes and organizations by what we'll say is passively getting engaged. So things like liking something on Facebook is a show of support, which makes some older generations crazy because that would probably not even register on their scale of involvement. You'll ask some fundraisers, well, is a donor involved? And they'll say, well, yeah, because they show up, they give money, they do all those other things. If you ask a millennial donor, they'll say, well, yeah, I'm a supporter. I like them on Facebook, so there's my support. Or I'll head to and provide an hour of service. And so when we think about getting started with those that are in their 20s and early 30s, that's actually a form of involvement that we need to celebrate to a certain extent and encourage ongoing. So starting a conversation by saying, do you like this? And if you do like it, now let's talk about the next step of bringing you to participate at another level. Some have really termed this as slacktivism, and we mention this in the book, and there's research that says those that like on Facebook and those that participate in forms of very passive engagement are sometimes 2 to 4 times likely to participate as donors and volunteers. And so this is a form of involvement that we need to look at, which is hard on some institutions who believe that being on campus or being present at events is your only way of involvement because they're not doing it that way.
I would agree. One of the things when we talk about slacktivism and talk about moving up that ladder of engagement, we're actually finding that individuals who are liking on Facebook or tweeting or engaged in social media are actually 2 times more likely to volunteer, 4 times as likely to get their friends involved and engaged. So there's research that's starting to show how this is actually moving into greater engagement.
And I would say in this spiral piece, what we've discovered is that there are passive people that watch things, right? So when somebody posts something, some of us like it, and when we don't get any likes, we feel very bad, right? And so, but when somebody likes something, we feel great, and then we continue to get involved, and it sort of spirals from there. So we become, watchers to now, I want to post on your behalf or comment, and then from there, I might participate and go even further. And so what an organization has to do is say, well, from liking to posting to then tweeting to then texting to then volunteering, what's the continuum that we're going to ask people to do?
Great. And just as a quick follow-up, do you guys have any tips, quick tips, if you will? Do certain things work better for millennials specifically? So like a photo online or, a question on Facebook versus some other types of methods?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is 10 years of a span of a generation. So we have from 20, even more, 20 to 33. So what we have found, even at those below the age of 23, are using things like Instagram. So imagery is very important. To those that are more in the 30s and at cuspers as we are, we might use more of Facebook and messaging, but imagery by far does go a long way in all generations. And we have seen, coupled with very short, succinct video, call to actions typically work too.
And I think the more conversational and authentic the tone is, the more likely that individuals of the millennial generation are likely to participate. We were looking just this weekend at some of the work that the American Heart Association has been doing. Typically, you wouldn't think of the American Heart Association as an organization that would be focused on the millennial generation. Yet they're kind of shifting the way that if you look at their Facebook page, they don't, first of all, they don't ask for money. They don't lead with any of that. What they're doing is they're trying to shift the conversation from heart, what do you call that? Heart disease. Yes, thank you. Heart disease prevention. As somebody who used to work on the Heart Truth campaign, right? Thank you for filling in there. And really shifting the conversation to prevent. How do you prevent? And how do you live a healthy life? And so they're giving tips on recipes and different things to engage their community in a really, a very approachable way. So I think that's, for an organization that's been around since 1924, they're starting to see that is a really important way to shift to bring in a new demographic. So.
That's great. And I think this opens up a broader discussion about technology in millennials. So we know, millennials tend to be, and this is a generality, of course, known for being tech savvy, if you will, because their generation, they've grown up with things like AOL that led to, Facebook, that led to Instagram, et cetera. So, you use some really powerful examples in the book. How can and should organizations integrate some of these platforms, and not necessarily just social media, but maybe technology writ large, if you want to cite some examples, to really take advantage of some of the passion and support that it can facilitate from millennials?
Yeah, and we have seen some organizations say, to a certain extent, we want to have a conversation online with people, right? So we want to get people in our Facebook community to get to this level of knowing about us, understanding us, commenting and connecting with us. And we've also seen very effective organizations say, at some point we have to move away from the technology piece into more interpersonal communication styles too as well. I think a myth is that they stay there, and that's not true. Even in the fundraising world, we'll find people that will give online, and there's data everywhere on this, that they'll give online and then they'll start to give in direct mail. We're thinking, why is that possible? They should all be staying online. Well, there's also brand association at that point, and they're starting to recognize in the organization. And so what we should be doing is thinking about what is it that we want people to get to at what point with us online, and then saying, how can we use people who are in our online community that we know to then pull that relationship offline to start that process too as well.
And I think the other thing for organizations to recognize is that there's simply no silver bullet. When you are working with a generation that's 80 million in size, you have 20-year-olds on one end of the spectrum and 35-year-olds on the other end of the spectrum. And as Derek was alluding to earlier, they're using technology differently. So not only do you have generations that are using technology differently, but you also have within generations people that are using technology. So it's incumbent upon organizations to really understand, know what resonates, provide that approachable language, and be able to engage in compelling ways that move people to action.
Great, and so action is a key word, and you use the phrase activation quite a bit in the book, which I think is a big topic on the minds of those trying to engage millennials in positive ways. So we at the Case Foundation actually have been looking into the pro bono movement through a program called Billion Plus Change, looking to create the nation's largest pro bono movement among corporations. It's been interesting how that movement of pro bono has been used by corporations with millennials specifically for recruitment and retention purposes within the job force. And that's another theme you talk about with underemployment and unemployment of millennials. So how do you guys sort of see, or what have you learned as some best practices with sort of skills-based volunteering in the workforce or out of as a tool for engaging millennials?
So the workplace is probably the most interesting and unique opportunity I think that exists, because there's a lot of focus of just who this, let's just get millennials out there. And if we would work with companies and help companies understand how to take pro bono service, we'd do a heck of a job. And what that means is that companies would then create challenges. And we have found that millennials that are on their jobs that feel challenged, just even in their own workplace, will do better. And they work in small teams, because as we note in the book, one of the key things that works with millennials is small groups of 5 to 8. And we do that already. My family and friends, there's 5 to 8 people we communicate with on a regular basis. And in the workplace, that happens too. Whether it's your team of management or whether it's just coworkers as well. And so creating challenges in the workplace and then helping nonprofits create challenges for their millennial employees to go work with them. And that's where we can find some really great synergies. And the pro bono service movements of A Billion Plus Change and all the others are great starts to help make that happen. And I really think that challenge mentality in a small group will really help the workers, really find what they want to do.
Sure. One of the other things that we talk about is this use of micro engagement and micro volunteering. And we're seeing the explosion of platforms like Sparked and Catch a Fire and some other organizations that are popping up that are really leveraging the skills and talents of individuals to then help build the capacity of nonprofit organizations. And so they're doing so by issuing small challenges, as Derek was saying, and then nonprofits are signing up and being able to pull from the knowledge base of the millennial generation. I think that's really important because for many millennials, I think the millennial generation is roughly 50% are unemployed, and of those who are employed, 50% are underemployed. And so they're looking for other opportunities to keep themselves sharp. And to be able to leverage their talents and their skills, and they're doing so through volunteer service. And it's just a generation that some would say, oh, they don't do it for altruistic reasons. They had to do community service as part of their high school requirement. But they're actually, whether or not that was altruistic or not, what we're seeing is that this is part of the DNA of young employees. They want to be giving back. And they're also, I think that one thing that's very compelling is certain research is showing that when millennials are going in for job interviews, one of the top questions that they're asking is, what is your philanthropic engagement? How are you giving back as a company? That's very important to them, and that they're basing decisions on how they can also give back.
And that's probably where the workplace also needs to help with nonprofits, and that can be challenging because whether you had a corporate foundation, a corporate social responsibility arm, HR, whatever it is that you can create experiences and make challenges try and happen, but the organizations that they work with have to be set up to do so as well. So it's not just, this is maybe where corporations can help nonprofits say, we want to create challenges, but we got to coach you on what that really means and work with you so that when our employees come to you and work with you, that they have a great experience. It's a win for you, it's a win for us, because after the experience, they come back excited to participate in other things that the company is doing. So this really needs to be a win-win from that standpoint.
That's great. And you mentioning, Carrie, the examples of Catch a Fire and Sparked. So that's interesting because I think when people hear pro bono, they think these long-term engagements, these international trips to third world countries or whatnot. So with Catch a Fire and Sparked, it's interesting, and they're sort of taking the best of both worlds with this slacktivism piece you mentioned. How do you think that might translate or manifest itself as a future trend in other volunteer work or projects or skills-based volunteering? Those little micro sort of engagements, and how might that help or hurt organizations?
Do you want me to take it?
You take it, Derek. I don't know.
I think that we all start somewhere, right? And so if we ask, and it was funny that when you ask some millennials, well, do you want to do these long-term commitments? They'll mention things like AmeriCorps because that's stuff that they grew up with. And some really great popular programs like Teach for America and others are there. And that there's a lot of people that want to be a part of that. But there's a lot of people that just want to help their community, but do it in a very small way. And as you go up the ladder of engagement in fundraising, we love triangles because we just have to have them. And so if you think about the bottom of a triangle, we're going to have a lot of people that do smaller things, and then over time build that. And we think as people, and there's some of the research showing that as we develop families and that we start to participate with our friends more, is that we find the place that we really want to spend more time with as we continue to age. And so the micro stuff, although it may not seem to matter to some organizations, it's so small, it actually has long-term for the individual. It's more like finding that job of what you want to do. You experiment for a while.
That's great. That's great. Well, you know, with that, events, whether they're micro or larger events, I've heard you talk previously about some trends with millennials using events as like a leverage point or a tipping point for fundraising. So what do you think, you know, how do you think this trend is growing, and how do you think we can leverage that for increased participation?
Yeah, so events are just popular with this generation, and that typically has been their on-ramp to some of their participation. We see that in the studies that we've done. A lot of them have supported their friends through peer engagement. And when we started to look at it, we see that some of the first philanthropic experiences that we have as kids is actually in school, sponsoring the run, race, walks, the run a mile and help my friend. My wife and I live in a community where our neighbor sells trash bags, and of course she does a heck of a job peer fundraising by showing me all what the other neighbors are bought, and they want me to buy as much. Or she says that, you know, down the street we got to, you know, compete on some sort of mile program. And so from that perspective, we are starting to instill this process of supporting each other and this philanthropic piece. And so when we see things like Dance Marathon at Penn that's, you know, raising $10 million over a weekend, and these are 20-some-year-olds, it's not, you know, it's not foreign because they're used to this type of piece. I think, though, you as an organization have to say, let's use this as our first entry point, but we're going to have to focus after that on how we take that as, yes, I'm kind of interested, and then moving them up that continuum we were talking about.
That's great advice. And Carrie, I actually have a quick question for you related to that. You know, that's practical advice for a lot of organizations, but let's take the sort of put the shoes on for an executive director for a moment and walk a mile in their shoes. So, you know, a common, I think, theme that you have in the book, or perception that you relay, is that, you know, we can't seem to get millennials engaged in our organization. They're just not interested, is the example you cite. If you get them to come to something, they oftentimes don't come back for a second time. So, you know, is this a fairly common concern that you think is valid? And what advice would you give to that executive director or leader who's trying to facilitate a long-term cycle of engagement?
Sure. I do think that this is a common trend, but I also think that for every millennial who seems disinterested or unengaged, there's also a boomer and a Gen Xer who, yeah. But that aside, you know, I think that what's important is millennials are driven by deep connections to issues. So we're seeing them. You know, they're not as driven or attracted to organizations, membership organizations in particular. They're finding a cause that they're really passionate about, and then they're going after it. And so I think that's a real shift for organizations. And so in order for institutions to be able to attract that millennial who's compelled by education or by poverty alleviation or by building a well in sub-Saharan Africa, those are very tangible things. So what institutions need to be able to do is show the direct impact of what those dollars, what their work is doing. And until they can really create that connection in the story, we're seeing millennials not, you know, kind of dropping off there. So I think that is kind of the first step is you know, how are you as an organization really taking the opportunity to show the impact of the work that you're doing.
And we see this a lot in fundraising, and we all have probably supported somebody in a run, race, walk, or in all these because we want to help our peer and our friend, and some of us want to help because it's our cause that we care about. And what I always find fascinating is that organizations behind closed doors in their board meetings will say, all right, we had 500 people at the event who are all new donors to us. They are donors. Maybe 10 or 20 of them actually got the rest of them there. And so we really only have 10 or 20 of them that are really great. The rest of them we have to spend a lot of time on. That's the opportunity yet challenge with peer fundraising to a certain extent, is that we're doing it for our friends rather than necessarily the cause.
So on that note, maybe going back to the fundraising theme we just talked about, what are some concrete or more tangible tips you have for an organization that does want to bridge that first step, that does want to bring back those other donors that might not have originally been interested?
You know, that's where you have to work through the peer, the person that brought them there. And so that means asking that peer to host smaller activities, small micro actions of volunteerism that involves the organization, and using that as the springboard to say, come back and do more with us later on. I mean, that's the first tip that we should probably make sure that every organization does. And then from there will be people that bubble up, and there will be people that just decide not to come back. And that's okay. We'll focus on those that do bubble up going forward.
Great, thank you. And so I'll just pause for a moment to remind anybody out there watching the live stream or joining us via Twitter to please do submit your questions. We're on standby for those using the hashtag #CauseForChange or that little chat box function. Okay, let's move on to talk about some workplace issues. Carrie, one of the questions I really had for you after reading the book was, could you identify some of the biggest differences or alternatively similarities that you see between generations in the workplace? How can we leverage some of those similarities and differences to benefit the actual mission of the organization, regardless of whether it's a nonprofit or corporation or government?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think for the first time, we're seeing 3 generations in the workplace. So there's a really interesting divide among the Gen Y, Gen X, and Boomers who are all occupying the same space. And they have different approaches, different ways of doing things. We're finding that the millennials are incredibly collaborative in their approaches. They want to work in teams. They want to do, they want to do group thinks and collaboration. And so that is, that's a huge opportunity for some of these group challenges and tasks that Derek was talking about earlier. I think, so collaboration is one thing. I also think, we've seen a couple of organizations who have decided that they're going to open up their office space. So they say, okay, we're going to do away with the walls, and we're going to just have cubicles or open space structures. And millennials at first are like, that's exactly what we want. That leads to greater collaboration. And the organizations that we've spoken with who have moved to this model, including, I believe, Derek's organization, it's actually backfired on them. And all of a sudden, you're in this open space, and you don't have privacy. And there are certain things, conversations that you want to be able to have behind closed doors. And so while that was, a step that a lot of organizations are taking, they might be putting the walls back up. So it's a really, these are some really interesting transitions that we're seeing. I would say the final thing that I would mention is also, if Gen X kind of created or introduced the concept of work-life balance, I'd say that Gen Y, millennials, are really introducing this concept of work-life blending. No longer are we turning off at night or going home and saying, okay, I'm going to go spend this time with our family. Instead, our families, and I'm looking at my husband here who's on his iPhone, we're constantly...
That was on live TV. She called out her husband.
He's recording Carrie. It's okay.
We're constantly connected. I'm sure he's tweeting a great question to us. But we are, we're constantly connected, and we're and so that's setting us apart. And so no longer are these separations between I go home and I shut off for the night, and productivity in some respects is actually going up because you can work wherever you are. But is that leading to a healthier lifestyle? That's debatable.
And there's some great research out of Deloitte and others that are using some really great work-life and also some work challenge pieces. And it comes down to that the small group interaction, all generations within the workplace, working together in that environment, we tend to see some great participation from all employees to accomplish some outcome. And so that's really what Carrie was saying, and making sure that we get to that point. I would also say too, though, is that, the millennials, as they're saying, we have a 40-hour job, they'll spread it out throughout the week. And to some that are older generations, it's 5 o'clock or 5:30. They might want to head home and then cut that off as well. And so we have to make sure that everybody understands who's working in those team environments, that yes, boomer individual who's a part of that team, this is not how I work. It's completely comfortable if you want to do that, millennial, but know that if you try and text me, email me at 9:30 at night, it may not happen till the next day. So being as open and transparent as possible.
Good point, good point. On that note, with workplace, I'm curious to know how you guys feel on the leadership topic. So in the book, you list a number of traits or generalities still, but characteristics of the next gen leader. Can you share some of what you think are some of the highlights of those traits?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is around transparency with the boards, with the organizations, and they expect it from the organization's executive leadership too as well. So gone are the days, I think, with this generation that all of a sudden you head in the conference room and then life is completely different, 5 minutes later. And so finding ways to be as transparent along the process is very, very important. I think the other thing too is saying as a leader that they don't necessarily have all the answers and being comfortable, and helping or older executive leaders need to help the millennials understand that I'm available if you need to talk, and having that opportunity. And I think that we'll see a lot of that transparency happen.
Great. It's interesting, as I was reading that chapter in the book, I thought to myself, we at the Case Foundation have been exploring this concept of being fearless, taking risks, being bold, and making failure matter. Do you think we could add be fearless as like a little asterisk to your list?
Absolutely, and in fact, I think we actually do. So perhaps you haven't
sorry.
read closely enough, but we appreciate all of all that you have read, because you pulled out a lot of great points. But yes, fearlessness is absolutely something that we think is important. It's important because we're seeing a generation of they're redefining social entrepreneurship or defining what social entrepreneurship means, and they're going out and they're building their own things, and then they're rallying their friends and via social media and texting and however they can get them to then work towards change in their communities and globally. And so I think that part of that is being a little bit fearless and being able to take risks and stepping forward and kind of going into the unknown a bit.
Yeah, I think and Carrie introduced me to this gentleman, his name is Mike Del Pont, did an incredible job. For some of you who have Brita water filters, you see that when you open them up, there's this little charcoal stuff in there. And you're like, what are these little dots? And should I be drinking this or not? And what he decided to do, because he's a designer and an entrepreneur, he said, you know what? I'm going to create the best designed water carafe that doesn't have the little gross stuff in it anymore. And instead of getting his own money, he decided to go to Kickstarter and raise $140,000, $150,000 to make his first prototypes and make it happen. And so I think that that's the fearlessness that we're seeing is, I may not have the resources over here, but figuring out how I can make this happen over there.
That's great. And I'm about to check out the iPad to see if there's any questions from our audience at home and the offices. So while I'm doing that, would you guys mind sharing some thoughts about what you might say to somebody that is a naysayer who's like, I don't need to read this book. I know everything I need to know about millennials, or, something of that nature. And like, what are some of the, again, going back to the first question, reasons why you did write this book, what are some of these sort of revealing or interesting things that you think people might not get on the surface of this?
I would say that if you're an executive leader, corporation or nonprofit, you need to read it to try and understand that you have a new workforce coming in. And even in the nonprofit field, a lot of them are millennials who are working for us, corporations too as well. And that things are different. Technology is new. Being open to all of that is important. And what I have found that kind of resonates a lot with executive leaders is that when it comes down to, at the end of the day, tactics and technology are there. The more transparent and conversational you can be with this generation about what's really happening and what you really need them to do, we'll see great success. And hopefully in the book that we talk about, that's the approach you need to take with this.
And I would say one of the numbers that hasn't come up yet in this conversation is 41 trillion. And that's the transfer of wealth between the greatest generation and baby boomers down to their Gen X and Gen Y children. So that is a significant amount of money that is being transferred. And if organizations aren't figuring out how to leverage that in creative ways that are compelling to this generation, they're going to lose out. And so I would say that's another reason that folks should be compelled to pay attention.
That's great. Okay, and it looks like we have a lot of questions for you right now. So I know the folks at home can't see this, but I'm curious to know how many people in the room have a smartphone or a mobile device. Not necessarily with them, but just excellent. So for the folks at home, it's pretty much everyone in the room, crossing all generations. So that's fantastic. So this question is, how should we invest in mobile to reach millennials?
Yeah. And the folks at Achieve have done some research as well with our previous partner, Johnson Gross-Nichols Associates too. And this year we're doing additional research on this. And what we have found is that some of the first interactions that millennials are having with nonprofit organizations is on their mobile device. And the challenge is, I don't know about you, but doing the pinch to try and figure out what's on the website doesn't really work too well, especially if you're asking them to sign up to do something. And what we're seeing is that the use of mobile, and some of the studies that we've done, is that more than 70% of them are using mobile to find things out about an organization. And one of the key things that we've discovered in some of the last research is that the least complex, the simple design, the Met Opera, we had some great examples, if you've read the report, that their mobile site got a lot of great reaction because it was so simple. And what they've discovered is that they weren't going to talk about who all their board members were on their mobile site. When somebody is going to go to the Met Opera mobile site, it's because they want to buy a ticket. It's all about buying tickets. There's nothing else on there. It might be a few names of stuff to call if I had a question. And so we have to think about what are people wanting to do on their mobile device when they hear about us.
And I think also recognizing that millennials are incredibly impulsive. And so if they have a bad experience on that mobile device, they're not likely to go and try to figure out other ways to, to buy a ticket or to give or do something else. And so you've got to make that a really easy process.
That's great. Thank you for those tips. I have one question for you, Carrie. I'd love to know your answer. Do millennials want to be mentored by boomers? What do you think?
Yes. I believe that they do. But one of the things that we talk about, and
We got some naysayers in there.
lots of naysayers in
I'm about
there.
to say
There are
there's
some boomers in
giggles.
this audience that do not agree. You can mentor me, okay?
Well, and we should add, should there also be mentorship the other way
Well,
around?
so that's what I was going to get to. So one of the things that we talk about in Cause for Change is the importance of cross-generational mentorship. That is something, I think going about and just finding in order to connect with somebody, you need to have some common ground. You need to have some things that bring you together. A lot of these matching programs say, my alumni association is going to match me with somebody who I've never had a connection with or talked to, and automatically we're going to hit it off. I think that the face-to-face and the relationships, that has to, that starts from someplace. And that's incredibly important. But I think we shouldn't dismiss the fact that boomers have just as much to learn from the millennial generation in various approaches that they take, certainly in their technology adoption and use. And so I just think that mentorship should no longer be thought of as a one-way street.
And it should be noted that in every generation, we find those that lead towards the top, right? And so that they want to be leaders and they start to participate in things that get them into more leadership pieces. In every generation, we also have those that just like to follow and just be great employees, but not necessarily take leadership. And then, yes, you also have those employees that may not care. I mean, those are other challenges that's not for this conversation, but for those millennials and those of that bracket that want to try and get involved, that's where you have to say, what boomer do we have out there that can really teach them, and at the same time, be very transparent with them to learn, and vice versa, and at the same way, but be warm and welcoming during that.
That's great. And I would echo those sentiments that I think all generations have a lot to learn from one another, each other. So one last question. How do nonprofits run by boomers keep in touch with constantly changing tech methods favored by millennials?
Interesting. I wrote a blog about my mom getting an Apple computer one time, and she's in the audience like, I didn't know you wrote a blog about that. So she's probably asking my wife where she can find it. Yes, I do tend to be a little bit of tech support for my parents at times. They wait for me to come home to St. Louis where I grew up and to try and fix the Wi-Fi. But what I have found is that, yes, millennials are very tech savvy, but they, after a while, taking that role all of the time of being tech support or all of that is not necessarily the way to go. What I've discovered, though, is that there are others like Gen X and millennials who do like to take a role of saying, here's some new technology, here's what's worth it, and here's what's not worth it. And there are some great other articles and pieces out there, some blogs that kind of give you that this is what you should pay attention to. I kind of look at QR codes. Some of us were really excited, and in the nonprofit field, some of us used a lot of QR codes, which are these little, square box codes, and we scan them on our smartphones, and hopefully something pulls up that we really want to see. But there's so many processes in that. It was great, and I remember some boomers asked me, "Should we be on this?" And I'm like, it's just hold off for a little bit and wait it out. And it's always good to learn from others. Some of them are really risky in nonprofits that will take certain actions. Learn from them and say, that's not what we want to do right now.
Great, thank you guys. So I have one last question for Carrie and Derek. So we're drawing, to a close on our live stream soon. Not quite yet, though. We have a little preview for you all as well to share. So my last question for you all is, what's the single most important takeaway that you guys have either learned or shared, or from this process of writing Cause for Change that you'd like to share with the audience?
So I think that for us, the process of writing this book was grueling and in many ways, but it taught us so much about our own generation, our peers, and the rate of change and what's happening. But I think that what the most important thing that I would love for people, for organizations to take back is the fact that it's important to be open. The world is changing. We are moving in a direction in a lot of different directions, and we're moving very quickly. And keeping up with the pace of change is difficult. It's challenging. But use millennials as your guide in many cases, and be open to allowing change. And I think that a lot of that comes from organizational change and doing things differently, and just being open to accepting that. So.
And I would say, too, is that don't throw out all the old tactics. They still work. And I think that's we should never talk to people of this age. We should always do it through text and all of that. Yeah, there are some that just prefer that only method, but there's a lot of people that don't. And we found this in our studies, too, that people will they'll support things if they're asked. If they're asked. And so if you ask them and you converse with them, some of them want to be conversed with technology, but there's also a lot of others that want to be conversed in other ways. And so we hope that at least comes out through the book.
That's great. So thank you guys so much. And for anybody who's watching or those in the audience, you can go to causeforchangebook.com to find out more about Carrie and Derek and all the hard work that they put into this great book on millennial engagement. So one segue now, we'll shift gears a little bit and focus on a conversation with Derek. For everybody here in the room, you probably have already heard, because you are somehow involved in this, about MCon 13. And for those of you watching via your computers, it's going to be a fabulous millennial engagement conference bringing together thought leaders, corporations, individuals from nonprofits, et cetera, together to talk about trends about millennial engagement from the Millennial Impact Project that Derek works on in tandem with Carrie and myself at the Case Foundation. So we'd like to tell you guys a little bit more and give you guys a sneak peek at some of the fun things that are coming up for this July 18th conference.
And so it was 2 years ago that we started conversations when Carrie was at the Case Foundation and with Emily about how do we take what's been done in the field and research and start to get people together, both in corporate worlds and nonprofit and government, to help them understand how to use the generation better. And it was through that we were a little risky ourselves and decided to do a virtual conference. And as the team at Achieve can probably attest to, that virtual conference is just like any other conference. There's as many things to do with that. And over the last couple of years, we've done this virtual conference, and we've had some really great participation and all of that. And the last time I was in DC debriefing with the Case Foundation, they said, well, let's think about having an in-person experience with this. And we took it back to Achieve and thought through it. And what we're really excited to say today is that on July the 18th, here at the Alexander, thanks to our friends, the Buckingham Companies and the Foundation at Cityway here, we're going to have and bring all of those national thought leaders and speakers all to this location. Stream it live like we're doing right now for more than 10,000 online that will be joining us, from hosting parties in New York City to Seattle to as well. The day will be filled with different types of thought leaders that are in the space. Gene Case from the Case Foundation will be here too. And then in the evening, we'll have some headliners, celebrities, and philanthropists joining us. You'll have to wait till April 1, as we'll announce who all those are, but we're excited that it's happening here. we'll be bringing not only some of the bloggers in the space together to write about it and start that process together. So July the 18th.
That's great. And one of the most special things I think about MCON and the Millennial Impact Report is the fact that millennials themselves are involved in the actual research, which I think a lot of times, you know, some of the critiques are, you're talking at millennials, but you're not actually
Right.
involving them. So can you tell us a little bit about the research portion of it and how millennials get involved?
Yeah, so right now, if you are a millennial, please go to the Millennial Impact, and we have some surveys there that you can take. And right now, we're going through the research process to understand this year's research, which is what triggers somebody to act in the moment when they hear a message, and what would make them want to do something more than others. Also, we're doing something unique this year. We're doing usability testing to try and understand what websites and how they view websites. So we're actually video recording and audio recording what people are doing on websites and when they see solicitations, getting their immediate reactions. So we'll have some great things to share. We'll share all of that research here at MCON. So we're excited.
That's great. I can foresee some of those reactions going viral.
Yeah.
So that's great. Are there any final words that both of you would like to share as we wrap up?
Yeah, I would say that the experience of writing a book is interesting. Would not have been able to do it without this. My wife can attest that when I was really writing, it was late at night, and so kids, and as Carrie has a child too as well, and so it was very interesting to do this, but very fun. It definitely has paid off, and I think what now starts is really the process to help people understand what it is and what we do, and using MCON as that platform. So I'm thankful, and thanks to Cityway Buckingham Companies and Foundation Alexander for having us.
And I echo those sentiments. You know, we've now deemed each other work spouses, which to our own spouses who are here tonight, thank you. And we owe a lot to both of you for your patience. But you know, I think for us, this is this is the beginning or the continuation of a public conversation here, and we want this conversation to be happening in boardrooms and at executive level of organizations across all sectors, because we think it's an important conversation to be had, and we hope, you know, that this book is a good guide that will allow and enable those conversations to be more meaningful.
That's great. And thank you on behalf of the Case Foundation as well for letting us be involved and a great partner to you guys on MCON and through the book with Genes Forward, et cetera. So we're really looking forward to July 18th as well. So in closing, for everybody, if you want to learn more about the book, go to causeforchangebook.com. And if you'd like to register and join us here at the Alexander on the 18th of July, go to themillennialimpact.com for more information. So I think that's it, guys.
Thank you.
All right,
Emily, thanks.
thank you. And thanks to everybody
Thanks,
here.
everybody.
Thanks.